All right, so we are working on another example where we are going to find 3 and 1/2 minus -1 3/10. They want us to write this in its simplest form. When they tell us that they want us to write it in simplest form, that means that they want us to write it in a fraction form. But we could look at each of those terms. And well, first, let me start off by writing our scenario. So 3 and 1/2 minus -1 3/10. Okay. So the first thing I always tell you guys to do is let's get rid of those double signs. So again, when we remember those double signs, remember if we're taking two positives and putting them together, not in addition and subtraction, but if we're talking about multiplication and subtraction, okay, what we're doing is you're going to have a positive. If you have two negatives, then you end up with a positive. And if you have a positive and a negative, you'll end up with a negative, and a negative times a positive is also a negative. Okay, so two of a kind is a positive, one of a kind is negative. Okay, and the way that we look at this is as if this is being multiplied. Yes, it is a subtraction problem. We're taking 3 and 1/2 and we're subtracting the opposite of -1/3. But the way that I look at it is as if it is a multiplication problem. So we're saying we're subtracting one times -1/3. That's the way that I look at it. All right. So when we get rid of those double signs, we now have 3 and 1/2. We know that two negatives combine to become a positive, and then we'll have 1 and 3/10. So that's what we're going to have. Now, the next thing is let's look and see what type of decimals we have. Do we have terminating or repeating? Hopefully, we're getting better with being able to tell what our halves are. If we're talking about taking one and splitting it into half, it's zero point 0.5 or 0.50. That is a terminating number. So let's see what happens now with 3/10. So if I take something, take one whole, break it up into 10 pieces, each of those is worth zero point 0.1, right? And we have three of those. So it's going to be worth zero point 0.3. So this is also a terminating number as well. Now, if they wasn't asking for the simplest form, we could have actually converted this into a decimal. And to do that, what we would have done is said 3 and 1/2 is the same thing as zero point 0.5 plus 1 and 3/10, which is the same thing as zero point 0.3. Remember, you can always take your fraction and you can plug it into your calculator two ways. You can say 1 ABC 2, right? So we have 1/2, hit the second button and go back. And you see that we have zero wholes, which is fine because we already took care of the whole numbers. We're only concerned about the fractional piece. So there's the zero point 0.5. Okay. The other way is that you could have done division if you're just looking at the fractional amount, right? So I could say 3 divided by 10. And if I do that, we see that it is zero wholes, which is fine because we've taken care of the whole numbers. We just need, again, the partial number, which is zero point 0.3. Okay. Another way, of course, you could always plug the whole number in there. We're just trying to see if the decimal amount is repeating or if it terminates, if it stops. So to do that, let's see, we'll go back to this 3 and 1/2. We'll put in 3 ABC 1 ABC 2. And then you're going to hit the second button and we want to activate the change between fraction and decimal. So hit that backspace button. So there you see we have three wholes and five, and our place value here is tenths, right? So 3 and 5, place value is tenths. So that is still a terminating decimal. We don't see a number continue to repeat. However, they want us to give them in simplest form. So we're going to solve it in its simplest form. But before we do that, let's see how we would solve this if it was a fraction form. So remember, when you're adding decimals, the key is to make sure that your decimals are lined up. So we have our decimals lined up from the start all the way through your answer. You need your decimal to be lined up. So 5 plus 3 gives me 8. 3 plus 1 gives me 4. So the decimal equivalent would be 4.8. Okay. Now let's go and see what it is because they want the fractions, right? So we have 3 and 1/2 plus 1 and 3/10. And remember, we're going to talk about Texas. So we're going to use the abbreviations of Texas for us to remember what happens. And remember, we're going to start from the bottom, work our way to the top as we convert our mixed number. A mixed number, again, is one that has a whole number and a fraction. So this is a mixed number. We're going to convert it into an improper fraction. An improper fraction is one where our numerator is greater than the denominator. So let's start with this. Now, why did I put that on this side? That should actually be right here. So this is t, and there's our x. All right. So what we're going to do is multiply 2 times 3. We're working from the bottom on up. 2 times 3 gives me 6. 6 plus 1 more gives me 7. Remember, your denominator will stay the way that it was, so that's 7 halves. Plus 10 times 1 gives me 10. 10 plus 3 gives me 13. So we have 13 tenths. Now what we need is a common denominator, right? So in order for us to find that, we need to find our multiples of 2s and 10s, okay? So if we're counting by 2s, we can go 2, 4, until we get to 10, right? And here, we're going to start with 10. So our least common multiple is going to be 10. So now we want to figure out, so that's going to be our LCD. Our LCD will be 10. That is going to be our least common denominator, right? So what do I need to multiply my first fraction by in order, my denominator, to get 10? Well, I have to multiply that by 5, right? So 5 times 2 would give me 10. And then for this one, 10 times 1 is going to give me 10, right? So we're going to use that information to rewrite those fractions. So 5 times 7 gives me 35. So my new numerator is 35. 5 times 2 gives me 10. So my new denominator is 10. Now we're going to add that with our second fraction. So we have 1 times 13 to give me 13 for the numerator, and then 1 times 10 to give me 10 for the denominator. So now we have a common denominator. And so now what we can do is just add those together. So we are trying to find out what the sum is of 35 and 13. Remember, your denominator will stay the same. In addition and subtraction, you need the same denominator all the way through. So what we have now is 35 plus 13. That gives me 48. That's 48 tenths. Okay. Now, what number, looking at that, is this the smallest that we can reduce our fraction to? I'm looking at it and I see that 48 ends in an even number, 10 ends in an even number. And if we remember our rules about 2, then I know for sure that they are both divisible by 2. So let's see what happens. If I divide both by 2, then I end up with 48 divided by 2, which gives me 24. And in my denominator, I have 10 divided by 2, which gives me 5, okay? Now, looking at 24 fifths, it does not look like I can reduce it anymore. So we're going to say 24 fifths, okay? That's the smallest we can make it. But now we want to turn it back into a mixed number. And the reason for that is because it is currently in an improper form, because our numerator is greater than our denominator. And just to confirm what we're doing or what we mean by that, remember, we're taking one whole and we're breaking it up into 5 pieces. But in this case, you have more than 5 pieces that are being used, which tells you that you have a whole number or more in there. So what we're saying is I have 24 of something, and I want to break them up into groups of 5. Well, how many groups of 5 can I pull out of 24? Well, hopefully you realize if we're counting by 5s that I can pull out 4 sets of 5, right? And then again, still remembering Texas because we're just working our way back to where we were, which is in a mixed number form. So we are saying 5 times 4, that gives me 20. Well, how many more do I need to get back to 24? Well, then you just need 4. So your mixed form, this is the proper form. It's going to be a mixed number. It's going to be 4 and 4 fifths, okay? So that is the same thing. 4 and 4 fifths is the same thing as 4.8, okay? So in this case, because they want the simplest form, your answer would be 4 and 4 fifths.